So today I want to talk about AOC's Mutual Aid 101 Toolkit that I mentioned in my last video. This document is hosted on AOC's website and is listed as a resource for the COVID-19 pandemic. While this document was produced well over a year ago in order to help people organize during the earliest parts of the pandemic, there's still a lot of good, useful information here that describes how people can start to organize these mutual aid networks and collectivize within their communities. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to take some time to look at this document and explore some of the ways in which one can form a mutual aid network and how to start setting up this process. Because this type of thing is useful not only during disasters or pandemics, but in day-to-day life to foster community in our day-to-day interactions. So with that said, let's take some time to look at this document. So we have here AOC Mutual Aid 101 Toolkit, #WeGotOurBlock. This toolkit includes step-by-step instructions for how you can build your own mutual aid network while staying safe from the spread of COVID-19. And again, this document is going to spend a lot of time focused on COVID-19, so there's going to be a lot of pandemic-specific stuff, but there's still a lot of good, useful information here in order to that can be used in order to help people organize regardless of pandemic situations. But this might still be useful if and when another pandemic occurs. So we have here the definition that the document presents of mutual aid. Mutual aid is cooperation for the sake of the common good. Now, I find that to be an outstanding basic definition of what we could define mutual aid to be. It's getting people to come together to meet each other's needs, recognizing that as humans, our survival is dependent on one another. If you're interested in learning more about the long history and the practice of mutual aid, we encourage you to read the links that are included at the end of this toolkit. Now, I want to say from the beginning that it's absolutely wonderful that they are putting more resources at the end of a document. Anytime you're teaching people the basics in a 101 style fashion, you want to tell people where they can go next to get more information if they're interested. And to me, that is very important in designing a mutual aid network, because a single document like this isn't going to talk about the deep pitfalls or issues that can come up. It's going to just basically outline how to start this process. So having resources that one can go to is extremely useful and important. So we start off with this graphic now as we enter into the main part of the document. Mutual aid with AOC and Mariame Kaba. So before we actually go over this graphic itself, I wanted to take a moment and ask the question of who is Mariame Kaba. Whenever I look at something like this type of documentation, I like to know who are the people behind it and what are they trying to accomplish. And in this case, I think most of us know who AOC is, but I'm not sure a lot of people might be familiar with Mariame Kaba. Well, I went to their website and I pulled up basic information. My name is Mariame Kaba. I'm an organizer, educator, and curator. My work focuses on ending violence, dismantling the prison industrial complex, transformative justice, and supporting youth leadership development. After over 20 years of living and organizing in Chicago, I moved back to my hometown of New York City in May of 2016. So this tells me a lot of information right from the beginning. This is an activist organizer who's been working in Chicago for a long period of time, someone who grew up in New York and has come back to New York. And it makes a lot of sense why this person who's going against the prison industrial complex is discussing issues of transformative justice and supports youth leadership in New York City might try to work with someone like AOC on this project. So the connection there makes a lot of sense in terms of what their goals are and AOC's are potentially, to try to organize people around these ideas. So going forward, I am the founder and director of Project NIA, a grassroots organization with a vision to end youth incarceration. Prior to starting NIA, I worked as a program officer for education and youth development at the Steens Family Foundation, where I focused on grant making and program evaluation. I've co-founded multiple organizations and projects over the years, including the Chicago Freedom School, the Chicago Task Force on Violence Against Girls and Young Women, the Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander, and the Rogers Park Young Women's Action Team, among others. I've also served on numerous nonprofit boards. And they go on and on through this very, very extensive About Me page, explaining a lot of the different projects they have worked on. Their current project, though, is something I feel inclined to highlight. I'm currently working as a researcher at Interrupting Criminalization, Research and Action with Andrea Ritchie. Combining participatory research, data analysis, and systemic advocacy, Andrea and I will work in partnership with local campaigns to identify primary pathways, policing practices, charges, and points of intervention to address the growing criminalization and incarceration of women and LGBTQ people of color for public order, survival, drug, child welfare, and self-defense related offenses. Research will be disseminated in accessible formats for the use of organizers, advocates, policymakers, media makers, and philanthropic partners working to interrupt criminalization at the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. This initiative hosts convenings of researchers, organizers, advocates, policymakers, and philanthropic partners on key topics relating to violence and criminalization, and support partners in developing and implementing campaigns designed to interrupt criminalization of women, girls, trans, and GNC people of color. So this is someone who, again, has a rich history of activism. So looking outside of some of their own words, I ended up coming across this article from the Chicago Reader, Abolish the Police, Organizers Say It's Less Crazy Than It Sounds. And in this, Mariame Kaba is described as follows. Mariame Kaba came to Chicago for graduate school in 1995 and eventually joined the local chapter of Incite. Incite, in my experience, is a wonderful organization that puts out a lot of good materials. Raised in New York in the 80s by her Guinean father and Senegalese mother, Kaba grew up in what she has called a collectivist and Black nationalist framework. In Chicago, nearly all current efforts at police and prison abolition can be tracked back to Kaba. Her students and those influenced by her work are leading many prominent organizations and are at the forefront of police protests such as Black Youth Project 100, Black Lives Matter Chicago, and Assata's Daughters. Her insistence that she is central to the movement is that she isn't central to the movement, that she is not a central figure in the movement, is as constant as her students' attribution of her work as the inspiration for their own. This is someone who has spent a lot of time doing grassroots work. This is someone who has spent a lot of time teaching and spreading information to the next generation, and has done so in ways that have spoken out against the way that the system affects communities, has spoken out against the police, and has supported organizations in developing like Black Lives Matter Chicago. So this is a prominent activist in a lot of communities and has done an extensive amount of work. Now, before we go any further, again, I just want to look at the graphic artist Becker Barad and just shout out their work. So Barad's work includes a bunch of infographics for different organizations, and so I just wanted to point that out, that this is not like a one-time thing, and that there is an artist behind all of this. And this person does things on like climate change and global warming and fossil fuels and carbon dioxide, and putting them in very neat ways for people to learn from. So getting back to the document itself, what is mutual aid? First thing we find is a quote from Kropotkin. We must cooperate to survive. Solidarity, not charity. Aid and activism and education. And so this is kind of a good representation of some of the basic ideas. It's cooperation, it's being together in community and solidarity, not charity, which is this kind of understanding that some people miss out on sometimes, where to be in solidarity with each other means we're mutually doing things for each other. It's not this person being a savior and coming and giving to someone else. And it's aid, activism, and education. It's continued work together, assisting each other, and educating each other on issues. How to build a mutual aid network. We'll build a pod map. Who are the people who could help me in this situation? Connect with folks. Ask them, can you help me? Sign me up with this situation. How can we work together? Find other people that are willing to do this with you. Find a buddy. Identify your support zone. So is this going to be something you do in your building? Is it something you're going to set up with your coworkers? Maybe just start some union activities, right? Is it going to be something that you do on your block? How many people can you get involved from a small enough space in order to do this? Because you want to start small with 5 to 20 people. Establishing communication channels, multiple, whether that be telephone, whether that be social media networks, and really start getting the conversation going. What are the needs of the community that you're trying to develop? What are the goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And at the end of the day, help each other. Pick up groceries and medication and supplies for each other, clean for each other, and keep each other safe. And that last one is very useful, especially during the pandemic situations that we were talking about. And the stay cautious section is more for the pandemic, but I'll briefly go over it. Grocery shop at non-peak hours, practice social distancing, avoid public transit, and clean surfaces often. And you can elaborate within your community how to make those type of things happen. One way to avoid public transit would be to carpool together with people that you know have been tested and or vaccinated. And so that's really useful in terms of just focusing how we can bring this community idea together to work towards our mutual benefit. So there's a small table of contents. What is mutual aid? And now it elaborates a little further. Mutual aid is a practice and politics that emphasizes solidarity rather than charity. What does that mean? It means we recognize that our well-being, our health, our dignity are all bound up in each other. It means that we understand our survival depends on cooperation, not competition. In this particular moment, we see that our health is also dependent on other people's health, and we can literally save each other's lives. Rather than disengage and feel powerless, mutual aid allows us to plug in where we can make the most impact locally. And that's the most important part about such a organization tactic. Mutual aid is local. It is to a specific group where you can come together and provide services for each other that you really do require and need. So mutual aid is getting people together in your community to provide material support to each other, building relationships with your neighbors based on trust and common interest, making decisions by consensus rather than relying on authority or hierarchy. And this is probably one of the most important parts about anything that is mutual aid related. You do not want something authoritative. You don't want a community leader coming in and speaking on behalf of everyone else. If you do have some sort of leadership, that leadership should be a justified position. Somebody who has an expertise in an area, someone who has some sort of background knowledge that they can bring in to make themselves fit into that position. And therefore, they are not doing it in an unjust way. And even then, people should be in dialogue with each other and continue to have conversations. It shouldn't be one person being in charge, dictating to everyone else. Consensus means people come together to create these decisions. Sharing things rather than hoarding things. So you don't want people just like gathering up supplies. I feel like during the pandemic and their early parts, a lot of people were hoarding things like toilet paper. So don't hoard it. Share it with your neighbors. Make sure they have. Make sure everyone has access to the things that they need. Treat no one as disposable. This to me is one of the biggest anti-capitalist talking points here outside of the authority and hierarchy thing. Capitalism so often treats people as disposable. Oh, you can't do something, you shouldn't eat, basically, is the mentality in a lot of cases. If you're fired from your job, well, that's just too bad, you don't get money. So the idea being that nobody is disposable and everybody needs to come together to support each other even in hard times. providing all kinds of support ranging from food prep to childcare to translation and emotional support, and recognizing the value of all of them. So, one of the things that is often done is that when you have a community formulate like this, when you recognize that people are there for you, it's not just in the ways that we conventionally think of work. It could be, I'm going to take care of your child for an hour while you go to the grocery store. Another person's going to come in and translate for your child and assist them in learning a language. You might have a person come in and food prep for the entire community. And in doing all of these things, you end up assisting each other and taking away some of the burden and tasks of daily life by working together with each other. Now, a political education opportunity where we build the relationships and analysis to understand why we're in the conditions we're in. And so this is the beginning framework of class consciousness. And if you saw my last video where I talked about Freire, where he's talking about this idea of class consciousness coming together and how a revolutionary leader points people in the direction of seeking class consciousness, this is what we're talking about here when I'm talking about AOC kind of fulfilling that role. By putting out a document like this, she's actually encouraging people to come out and analyze and ask questions. Why are the conditions the way they are? And the answer is going to come down to a mix of the racist and sexist and homophobic policies, in addition to a class analysis. And by merging all of that together through intersectional thought and theory that will be developed from the people working together and being in community with each other, by turning their isolated ideas and incidents into larger ideas that can be formulated into a type of knowledge that can be shared within the community, people can identify the problems that they experience not as individual failings, but as an issue of a much wider systemic problem. And that is an important and revolutionary tactic. Preparation for the next disaster, natural or economic, next time around we'll already have relationships with each other in place. And that's a key part of why I thought it was nice and good to share this document and start talking about this. Even though the pandemic is still raging on, there's every potential that there might be an economic disaster that we go through, another financial crash. There might be another pandemic that happens. There could be any number of factors, especially under our current capitalist system and the way global climate change is occurring, that could put us in a vulnerable place where we need each other's support. And having these networks now, as opposed to later, can be a great benefit. It's also a great jumping off point for all other kinds of organizing and movement work. You know, you get people who learn how to do this, they feel empowered, they start to move it into their workplace, they start to form labor, a labor union. They start to talk about how they can start forming child care collectives. And from one form of organizing gets merged into another, and we all can come together and rely on these different networks for our mutual aid and benefit. Now, what mutual aid is not? It is not quid pro quo transactions. It's not a direct equal exchange. It's not I do for you in exchange for something else. It's I do for the community with the expectation and understanding that the community is going to come out for me mutually. That it's going to be all community members interacting with each other. And in a lot of models of mutual aid, they do go into and talk about how it's not I do for you, you do for me. In a lot of ways, it's a cyclical process. I do for another member of the community, who does for another member of the community, who does for another member of the community, who eventually does something for me. And because we can rely on each other in this way, based on our means and our needs, rather than on some sort of economic factor, we're able to provide a greater service to the community around us. It is not only for disasters or crises. This is something that could work out for daily life as well, and can be beneficial. If you have one person picking up all the kids, you now have freed other people to have time to go do other things, or to be at work, or to do any of the other things that can help improve both their financial, emotional, or whatever situation in their lives. Like, you can generally make certain tasks collectivized so you can take away some of the burdens from others. It is not charity or a way to save people. And this, to me, is one of the most important factors, like I said. Charity has this connotation that you come in and you save people, you throw money at the problem, and you're some hero coming in and nothing's given back to you. No, mutual aid requires a mutuality. It has to be mutual. It's not a savior coming in and fixing the problem, often a problem that they caused in the first place in many cases of charity work. Not the specific organization itself, but the structures and system at large. Capitalism causes a problem, and someone who's a prominent capitalist comes in and throws money in a situation to fix it or, make it less damaged. And then you praise that person and you make statues in their honor or you name schools after them. This is not what that's about. This is about people in communities coming to each other's aid, working with each other, and creating positive outcomes. And it's also not a reason for a social safety net to not exist. And I think that's also important. A lot of people get fearful, well, if I'm going to do this kind of mutual aid thing, then what about the government programs that are basically keeping me sustained under capitalism? Well, you need them. You need to keep them. For now, a lot of ways, it's the thing sustaining people's livelihoods. And until people can organize and start to make changes and start realizing and fully fleshing out the extent at which capitalism and a lot of the other institutions are affecting the world around us, you can't really just remove those safety nets. People need to get to the point where they can start organizing and developing their communities a lot further before we could talk about alternatives to that safety net. And it has to come from the people themselves to demand these better things and to demand ways in which we can do something better than a social safety net. So how do we formulate any of this? Well, we build a neighborhood pod. You have to think about who's in your support network already and who are the people that you can already rely on. And in order to do this, you find one or two good people if you can, and you start trying to reach out to people, identify where your location is, and invite neighbors in. If you have phone contacts of some of your neighbors, but not all of them, ask people that you get in touch with to see if you can contact other neighbors. If you want, you can formulate some sort of group online on social media in order to help create these kind of frameworks, maybe a local school organization where the majority of families in your neighborhoods live. You can go to flyers and put them up in common spaces in a building where people are able to see them. And the initial outreach, especially in a large city like, say, New York, where AOC is, these ideas should be put in as many languages as possible. And if your building has a lot of people who speak, in this example, Korean, then you should include both English and Korean in your invite. And to this document's credit, there is an invite written in several languages already that are prominent in New York: Mandarin, Bengali, Spanish, and English. And while there are other languages that are spoken in New York City quite commonly, these are four of the most prominent within AOC's district, as far as I'm aware. So after you've kind of started wanting to create this idea, how do you converse with people? How do you start these conversations? Well, you start with treating each other with respect and assuming the best intentions. So you want to put forward a idea that we're supposed to be coming together and we're going to work together in a respectful manner. That this isn't, again, that top-down hierarchy. You want to get a sense of what each person needs and what each person can do to help. There are some questions to ask each other. What are your hobbies and interests? What languages do you speak? When are you generally working and busy, and when are you generally available? How regularly do you want to check in? What's your living situation like, and who lives with you? Who are your emergency contacts, people we can reach out to if there's an issue or you go missing or something happens? What resources and skills and knowledge can you bring to the table in this organization? What are your needs? What are you afraid of losing? Tell us a little bit about those things. Do you have any important health information that you want to share that people should be aware of? Things like prescriptions, appointments that need to be maintained and you might need help getting to or obtaining. What are your primary concerns if, say, like the pandemic lasts 2 months or longer, but you could focus that as what are your long-term concerns for the neighborhood, for the block, for the building, for the company, whatever you're organizing in. And these questions really do boil down to one thing. How do we get to know each other? How do we start to break down some of the boundaries that we have around each other? And how do we start to formulate conversations with our neighbors to get to know them and explore the mutual interests and needs that they have with us? How do we start to prioritize the community and bring everybody together? And you might find that it takes multiple conversations, and it might take multiple one-on-one conversations where you switch pairings with each other in order to start this out. One way to do that is you can actually set up a list where people will split up and divide into pairs, and you keep a input sheet so that everybody has time to spend a little bit of time getting to know each other in a one-on-one situation. You don't want it to be where some people know each other and are kind of in the know and in the clique, as it were, but other people are outside of it. And you can utilize resources like a spreadsheet to do that. Then you're going to want to support each other while this network has been formulated. Your pod's going to have a lot of needs: food, childcare, cleaning supplies, emotional support, mental health, internet access, anything that you need. Tutoring has been a big one during the course of the pandemic. Anything that you can provide, anything that you need, create lists of them and try to organize all of that together. And again, you have the invite information here, as well as health and safety tips for all of that. Now, one thing that I think I skipped over that I briefly do want to go over is the idea of a phone network. It's listed somewhere in here. What is a phone tree? So a phone tree is a way of communicating information extremely quickly over a larger group of people. Now, again, in general, you're not going to want this group to be more than 5 to 20 people at the beginning, and the extent and size of your group is not going to want to be huge, at the end of the day. You're not trying to create a huge collective. You're trying to create a pod. And eventually you might want to split off and separate 2 pods into 2 groups that make sense to each group, where the 2 of you, of course, ally and come to each other's events and work together, but you function separately. Maybe one building with another or one block with another, in order to keep the numbers low, to keep things effective and moving. But the phone tree itself is a great tactic where one person reaches out to 3 or 4 people, and those people then reach out to 3 or 4 more people, and you go down like a tree in order to spread information. Now, this is not something that you use for decision making and meetings, but something to just quickly spread information. Because if you did that during a meeting or to decision make, that would really be a hierarchical coordination where the person at the beginning has more power than everyone else. So you generally don't want to do that. What you want to do is use this to convey a quick bit of information so you don't have to have everybody meet at the exact same time to spread certain bits of information. So with all of that said, I wanted to, again, take all this time to look at this, to explore how this is a good marker to how to set up these kind of beginnings of a mutual aid network, to formulate pods and to invite neighbors and people in our lives into some sort of dialogue or conversation so we can start to identify the problems of our lives, not as individual issues, but as collective problems, things that we need to explore together. So with that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.